Now, with polls showing that the majority of Americans favor marriage equality, Sean, do you think we're actually now finally, as a country, at the tipping point where you'll see marriage equality pass in all the states?
I think tipping point is exactly the right phrase. I think we are seeing leadership from Democrats and Republicans alike. We are seeing a real bipartisan shift on this issue. I think that the tide of history is turning toward the freedom to marry. I think with a victory in New York, we can move on to other states, and I think we can finally turn to federal marriage discrimination and strike down the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, which denies the tens of thousands of legally married same-sex couples the whole layer of federal rights and protections and responsibilities. I think we are at a tipping point.
Margaret?
I couldn't agree with you more, actually, and it's a generational shift as well. I mean, this is something where everybody who's 30 and under looks around, they have friends that are gay, they have sisters, brothers, cousins, coaches, teachers, and then they say there's absolutely no reason why my friends, neighbors, coaches, cousins, brother should be treated any differently under the law than I am. And we are just getting to a place in our society, thank God, where really everybody will have the same freedoms. And I think you're right. I think it's a tipping point. I think hopefully it will happen. The progress has happened so quickly. Hopefully it won't take another decade before everybody has the same freedoms to marry.
Now, I want to get both of your reaction to some very strong words that we heard early in the week by Archbishop Timothy Dolan, who referred to same-sex marriage legislation, quote, as an ominous threat, unquote, to society. Sean, what do you say in response to that?
My response would be, let's look at the 5 states and the District of Columbia where we have the freedom to marry. Let's look at New Hampshire and Iowa and Massachusetts. What we've seen in those states consistently across the board is that families have been safer with no one hurt in the process. Any fear-mongering on this issue, any suggested threat to the institution of marriage, I think is really taken away when you just look at the reality on the ground of the 5 states where we have marriage, where life has gone on, the sky has not fallen, but really families and same-sex couples have been helped.
And what I would say, Julie, in addition to what Sean says is, you know, when you hear this sort of rhetoric, when you hear the bishop saying this is an ominous threat, you know, it sounds quite, you know, scary. But when you think about, make it personal. Who are the people in your life that you know that are gay? And how would them being able to marry the person they love be a threat? A threat to society, a threat to you, a threat to your neighbors, a threat to your children. And if you can answer that question, most times if you're true to yourself, you'll realize that there isn't a way that it's going to threaten anything. It's going to make that couple happier. And it's not going to change the institution of marriage. It's not going to change your marriage. It's not going to change your neighborhood, except make it maybe a little bit more stable and a couple a little bit more happy. But if you put these things in personal terms rather than the overarching sort of what I think is a bit fear-mongering in terms of the rhetoric, just make it personal and ask yourself the question, how is this going to hurt me or my family or my neighborhood?
And how do you both grade Governor Cuomo's performance here on this issue?
I think Governor Cuomo has been an extremely strong leader on this issue. I mean, from the moment he came into office, he said he had a number of priorities, a number of legislative priorities, and he put the freedom to marry near the top of the list, and he has really followed through. He showed tremendous leadership, and I frankly wish that every other governor in every other state would show the same leadership.
Do you think we're going to see a domino effect in some other states, Margaret?
Well, you know, look, New York will be the largest state to enact freedom to marry if it passes, and it will have been done so by the legislature, by the express consent of the governed. And that, rather than through the courts, will be a very, very significant advancement. I do think Governor Cuomo has been a strong leader on this. Certainly, compared to his predecessor, he has seen more progress on this single issue. However, I would also say that this is a bipartisan effort, and the Senate Republicans and the leadership of the Senate Republicans in New York has also been absolutely critical. So it's a bipartisan effort, and I hope that we see more bipartisan efforts across the country.
Well, Sean and Margaret, thanks so much for joining us today. When we return, we'll be joined by Tony Award nominee Rory O'Malley, who stars in Broadway's The Book of Mormon. Stay with us. We're now joined by Tony-nominated actor Rory O'Malley, who stars in The Book of Mormon. Rory, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I want to start off by asking you the same question that I asked Assemblymember Danny O'Donnell, which is, do you think that we're going to see Governor Cuomo sign marriage equality legislation this week?
I do. I absolutely believe it. I've seen so many people calling their state senators and so many people really trying to make this happen for years now. And this is the first time I really get a sense that it actually can happen. And the governor himself seems fairly confident that the votes are there. And when you see senators, Republican senators, coming forward and stepping out and saying this is the right thing to do, I think that's a pretty good sign that it's just about getting all the wording right at this point.
Now, we hear a lot about political and social activism of actors in Hollywood, but we seem to hear a little bit less about that on Broadway. Would you like the media to be more cognizant of all the activism that's happening on Broadway?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the biggest asset that Broadway has are some of our charity work. I mean, Broadway Cares is one of that organization is my hero. I mean, the people who run that place are my mentors, and I think that the Broadway community is very active in many charities and nonprofits, and I started an organization called Broadway Impact, and Broadway Impact is mobilizing the theater community, its fans, the actors, directors, to rally around the issue of marriage equality, to educate and inspire people, to let people know that this is something that the Broadway community believes in and that we should fight for.
And what is your message to members of religious communities who fear, as Archbishop Dolan declared, and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, that gay marriage is what he calls an ominous threat to society, unquote?
Right, well, my message to religious communities, which I was raised Catholic, is that this has nothing to do with Catholicism. This has nothing to do with the church. I am not petitioning the church for any rights. I am petitioning my government to give me my civil right to marry the person that I love. And I think that's a very important distinction. I think that the separation between church and state doesn't just protect the state, it also protects the churches. I mean, I think that it's important for the churches to realize that this is not about them. This is about people who want to have their civil rights. And, I think that now they're trying to make sure that the wording is correct and that there are certain protections and guarantees that are put into this bill. But I believe the Constitution takes care of that on its own. And I think that we'll all be just fine. I don't think the world will end. I think it's actually going to be a greater country because we'll all have the right to marry.
Now, being brought up as a Catholic and having that kind of upbringing, are you offended then by the Archbishop's very strong words?
Yes. Yeah, I am. To be honest, I mean, I won't take it personal because I'll just decide that on my own. But yeah, of course I'm offended. I'm just trying to live my life. I hope to have a family one day and to protect that family in every way possible. And I believe that having a marriage is a wonderful thing for a family to have. I'm offended. I've never met the man, and he's trying to make sure that I don't have my dreams realized in the future.
I want to return to where we started in terms of our interview, which is talking about Hollywood versus Broadway, because some have surmised that coming out in Hollywood can be a very painstaking decision, and yet some people posit that coming out in Broadway can be a more liberating experience, that there is more support of your peers. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that, first of all, coming out is a very personal decision, no matter where it is, on Hollywood or Broadway or at the bank that you work at. I think that it's a workplace, and anytime you are coming out in your workplace, it's a personal decision. And it just happens to be that Hollywood and Broadway are more high profile as professions. I think that definitely the Broadway community is very supportive and has been for years. I think that Hollywood is getting there, and I think that there are lots of people out there who are breaking down the walls, and people who I look up to as an actor who have said, this is who I am in my personal life, but I can play lots of roles. I'm not the same person when I play these different characters, and that's changing very quickly. Started with Ellen DeGeneres over a decade ago, and you know, it's changing very quickly.
And do you think that in your lifetime you'll see marriage equality in all 50 states?
I am absolutely 100% sure of it. I don't think it's going to happen just because we sat back. I think that we have to take action and we have to make things happen. We have to hold our legislators accountable, and we have to put in the work. But I am 100% sure that it's going to happen. And for me, it's the challenge isn't just to make it happen. I want to be able to sit down my children one day and tell them, this is how your father fought for your family. And I think that it's a big challenge, not just to the gay community, but to the straight community, to say, what will you be able to tell your children that you did one day? Because this is not a question of if, it's a question of when.
On that note, Rory O'Malley, thank you so much for being here on Give and Take today.
Thank you.